Learning how to paint before the internet existed was slow and mostly a solitary experience. Instant access to video has drastically changed how people learn to paint today. But you might be surprised to learn that this transition didn't happen overnight. It began in the 1940s, long before YouTube existed. I was born in the early 1970s, and it would be decades before the internet became available. Learning how to paint during that era was largely a solo adventure. It was a slower process, and it required motivation. In case you're wondering, this is acrylic on watercolor paper. I completed the drawing with ink pens, and these are acrylic inks. I like using acrylic inks because you can get watercolor-like effects with them. Okay, so where was I? Finding decent instruction wasn't passive. It took much more effort than doing a quick search on your phone. And by the way, phones back then were big plastic boxes bolted to the wall. They had 0 apps. If you asked a kid in the 1970s if they had any good games on their phone, they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. Phones were used for making calls, video was limited to TVs and film projectors. As for art instruction, it mostly came from school classes and printed materials, such as books and magazines. Most of these experiences were hit or miss. You might stumble upon a great teacher or a helpful book, but your access was limited by your geography. Your local school might only have 1 or 2 teachers, and that was it. And since art and music are often the first departments to get cut during budget downturns, those programs are usually underfunded. So there was a lot of randomness in the quality of instruction that you had access to. That's why learning to draw and paint was mostly a self-directed, solo pursuit. In grade school, art classes were often craft-based. One week you'd be making a pinch pot in clay, and the next you'd be finger painting. College classes would go deeper, but that depended upon the school. Some focused on traditional realism, others leaned into conceptual or abstract art. This led to some strange situations. You might take a drawing class from an instructor who hadn't drawn anything representational in years. Some never demonstrated at all. They just give out assignments and critique the results. Just imagine taking a math class where the teacher never solves a problem in front of the class. And this wasn't just an art class problem. I took Spanish classes from teachers who didn't speak Spanish, but that's another story. Libraries were a better source for learning materials. School libraries might have a few books or magazines, but the local public library usually had more. There might be a dozen or so art instruction books to choose from, but compared to video, books are less detailed. They require more interpretation and effort on your part. Some books were classics, others were vague and confusing, or maybe they just didn't match the style you were aiming for. Magazines were another source. These were kind of like the websites of the time, but much slower. The most popular magazines came out once per month. If you followed 2 of them, that was your entire supply of new instruction for the month. It was a trickle compared to what's available today. And let's not forget the effort it took to access that material. You had to convince your parents to drive you to the library. And if they were busy or the weather was bad, that could take days. Once there, you had to find materials yourself. No search bar. Just an analog card catalog and some hope. Okay, I have to point out that this tree is looking mighty blue right now. Don't worry, this is just an initial wash. I'll be charging it with darker greens and some yellow soon. It'll eventually make sense and look like a tree. Alright, back to the story. So while I was learning through books and other analog materials, a quiet revolution was already in motion, and no one could predict where it was headed. Video is simply more effective for teaching art than books are. Everyone thinks of Bob Ross, but the first major video art instructor was John Nagy, and his show aired in the late 1940s. It was called You Are an Artist. Nagy drew charcoal on black and white TV and sold companion kits with pencils, paper, and blending stumps. I had one of those when I was a kid. It was a lot of fun to play with. Fast forward a few decades and you get William Alexander painting landscapes in oil on PBS. He was Bob Ross's teacher and introduced him to the wet-on-wet oil painting technique. Around this time, video in general was taking off. TVs became more affordable, and VCRs let you record shows and watch them later. Videotapes also made it possible to distribute less popular, niche content. I'd never had art videos on VHS, but I did collect many art instruction DVDs. I remember borrowing an acrylic painting book by John Hammond from the library. I learned a few techniques, but then I bought his DVD, and everything just clicked. Seeing the process from start to finish made all the difference. I could watch how he mixed colors, how he glazed over previous layers, and how the whole painting came together. It was like going to a live demo, only better because I could rewind and watch the best parts again. That was the power of video. A book might have a few progress shots and some written instructions. A video, even a grainy VHS tape, delivered 30 frames per second. Just a few seconds of footage gave you more visual information than an entire book. Video was clearly effective, but it still had a major bottleneck, and that was distribution. TV airtime was limited, you needed a massive audience to justify a show, and the gatekeepers decided what aired. In the early days, the internet couldn't handle video because the speeds were too slow, and files were too large. But once bandwidth improved, everything changed. YouTube launched in 2005, and it was acquired by Google in 2006. Today we have high-resolution 4K video streaming 24/7, accessible from almost anywhere in the world. Instead of flipping through a card catalog and waiting days for a library trip, you can now find thousands of painting tutorials before you finish your green tea. Subtitles make it possible to learn from artists around the world. And there are no gatekeepers. Anyone can teach, and anyone can learn. When I was a teenager eating pizza on a Friday afternoon while watching Bob Ross, I never imagined that someday anyone can create their own art instruction video. It's a great time to start learning how to paint, but I'm also glad that I learned when I did. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy. But the slow, analog process taught me patience and made me resourceful. And those skills still shape how I paint today. This was a bit different than my usual videos. If you enjoyed this commentary style, let me know in the comments. I might make more of them in the future. Up next, you can watch my acrylic painting playlist. Thanks for watching.